I'm excited to have Cindi Lockhart here today. Cindi is an incredible functional med. That was kind of Oprah, wasn't it? That was kind of Oprah.
Pretty much was.
She's an incredible functional nutritionist. We're so lucky to have her be a part of our care team here at Vital Health. She actually also has a private practice, but we love having her as a clinician on the Vital Health team. And so what we thought we would talk about today, since Cindi is super expert in this particular topic, I felt like I needed her help to bring you information about histamine. There's been quite a few of my patients that have come along recently that have had histamine issues that they kind of maybe even suspected that they did, but they weren't exactly sure. And there's just been, I feel like it's just been bubbling up so much more. Have you seen that too in your practice, Cindi?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
A lot more.
Yeah, I just feel like there seems to be, I don't know if it's just like, once you have that bias of recognizing it, like all of a sudden you're like, wow, it seems like it's a big common thing.
Everybody has it. Yeah.
Yeah. But like, could it just be that we all have some level of it? So in this particular discussion, what we're talking about is not so much the histamine reactions that the majority of us know about. Like if you have environmental allergies or dogs or cats or whatever, and you have the itchy eyes and the runny nose and sneezing and maybe hives and that kind of thing, that's sort of a different, I mean, it's still the same pathway involving histamine, but what we want to focus on today is more about the histamine as it relates to gut health and gut function and foods that contain histamine that may be triggering certain symptoms. So with that, what the heck are we talking about today, Cindi?
So to your point, Tiffany, I mean, this is really, something that I have experienced more with, and I tend to do an elimination diet with a lot of folks out of the gate, just to bring more of an anti-inflammatory approach to nutrition.
Yeah.
And what I find is like when folks feel worse on that, then we tend to dive in, and it's either one of two things, FODMAPs or histamine. And I have seen a lot more of the histamine response.
Yeah.
And it does, it tends to get triggered by, I also think about the virus that has been going around, whether you had the virus, possibly in the vaccine, you have these underlying infections, and it seems to have triggered more of a response to it. But I agree with you. I mean, I've got some folks who are debilitated in regards to this. Like they're on disability, they can't eat anything other than an elemental diet because their body is reacting at such an intense level, and they haven't even necessarily been diagnosed mast cell. So, I know we're going to talk about how do you even diagnose it. What I've experienced in my practice is that a lot of people haven't even fully been diagnosed with a histamine issue or mast cell, but when we do help them calm their nervous system and take out some of the higher histamine foods, they feel better.
Yeah, definitely. And there's probably a continuum, right? Of people who have more mild reactions, maybe just oral allergy syndrome, for example, where they get, their tongue burns or they get oral itching if they eat certain foods, all the way through people who have full-on mast cell problems. And mast cells are the cells that are responsible for the histamine response. And they can be, there's a whole bunch of syndromes that are tied up in that. And it can look quite devastating for people, as you said. So give me some of the classic symptoms of somebody who gets on your radar for potentially like, this is somebody who needs to think about taking histamine related foods out of their diet. What does that look like?
So there is, to your point, a lot of the allergy type of reactions, so rashes or hives or itching, a lot of skin reactions, and it may be oral only, or it might be throughout the whole body. GI symptoms, so that can be anything from heartburn to gas and bloating to constipation, diarrhea. So you would think it's IBS, but that's also really common in the histamine world. Headaches and migraines, tingling extremities, difficulty regulating body temperature, anxiety, insomnia. And another thing too, because I often think about the POTS folks. So there's a big correlation with histamine and POTS. So the tachycardia, so the high heart rates and the low blood pressures. Like a chronic cough, like they cough, and it might be after eating something, or it might just be in general.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of the common symptoms that I tend to hear from folks, and especially if I see a myriad of those, like a good sampling from the different areas, then that's where my brain goes.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think one of the things that I tend to forget sometimes when I'm seeing patients is that histamine is an excitatory neurotransmitter. So it is one of those things that people feel anxious when they have histamine problems or they have insomnia. So it can be a root cause of that particular disorder, which most people think like, oh, I just have anxiety. But there are oftentimes root causes. And I think to your point, yes, people who have autonomic problems, autonomic nervous system, that's the nervous system that sort of runs everything behind the scenes, all of the breathing and digestion and all your heart rate and all that kind of stuff. The POTS syndrome, postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, is an example of that type of autonomic problem in some people. Their blood pressures can go low. They get dizzy when they stand up. I've had some very severe POTS patients in my practice who responded very well to removing histamine-related foods from their diet. So yeah, there's definitely a crossover to the nervous system that we don't tend to think about sometimes. We're like, oh, histamine, it's like hives and itching, but it does have tons and tons of crossover. So if you suspect that somebody has a histamine-related problem, kind of walk us through either how you would help them sort it out from a food perspective or figure out is histamine involved? Are there certain tests that can be run or should be run in order to try to figure out is it that or is it something else?
So I haven't dealt a lot with the testing unless the functional docs that I'm working with, like you, are doing the testing.
Yeah.
So I'm not real versed on that. I do know there's a few labs out there that will look at like DAO, zonulin, and histamine in the gut. And there are different blood labs like tryptase or histamine or chromatographin A, I believe.
Exactly.
That are often used. But I don't get as much into that. I tend to my approach is to trial it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like if there's enough signals and signs that this could be an issue, it's not going to harm us if we do a trial of like a month on a low histamine diet and just see how you do.
Yeah.
And if things seem to be calming down and improving, then we're on to something.
Absolutely.
And I always like to get to the root cause of like, what are those underlying factors that are triggering, you know, the histamines to be overreacting?
Yeah. So tell me about what are the foods that you focus on eliminating in patients who you suspect have histamine issues?
So the primary ones that really, and so that there's two things, you know, when you think about like an overall summary of what are the higher histamine foods, it's anything that's aged, fermented, or aged and fermented is the biggest thing, or microbially ripened. And even so like leftovers. So people don't really think about that. I know my husband even
I didn't know that either, actually.
My husband has a variation of a histamine response. We haven't been able to fully pinpoint it. So even with him, like if we have a meal and then we put something in the fridge and it's sitting there for maybe 1 day, even sometimes, or for sure 2 days or beyond, if he has it, it's like an immediate reaction. His mouth flares and he gets really itchy and has this cough, and it's really, and he can even constrict, like throat can close a little bit.
Wow.
So what we've moved to is, you know, we certainly want to make life easier in the kitchen. So I always say, if you're making dinner, make double or triple, and then freeze it. So we've got all of these like glass containers, Pyrex glass containers that will immediately put the leftovers in and then label it. We make a mistake of not labeling initially, like, what the heck is that?
What is this block of ice? I don't know. Looks kind of weird.
Well, it's a mystery lunch for you. And
it'll be a surprise. Surprise casserole.
And then you just got to defrost it quickly.
Yeah.
So
okay. So freezing it makes a difference instead of putting it in your refrigerator. Oh, this is great. I'm so glad we had this talk because I just learned that. I didn't realize that, you know, I always thought if you refrigerated it, you know, it's staying fresh to the point where the breakdown process doesn't happen. But okay.
So even for some folks, depending on how sensitive they are to histamines, we even have to look at going more frozen versus fresh for produce.
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
because
that makes
we
sense.
don't know how long it's been sitting on the store shelves, and then it comes and sits on our shelf. So even just that ripening can affect somebody's response.
So that's cool. So you could potentially avoid having to give up some of your favorite fruits and vegetables if you flip what kind of freshness or frozenness you're looking at taking in. Makes a huge difference for people. Wow. Okay, so it's obvious, like the fermented stuff, like aged cheeses,
Yes.
kombucha, beer, wine. I mean, alcohol in
Any
general.
alcohol.
Yeah.
Any alcohol.
But
Are
there others?
dry farm wines might be your safest bet on the alcohol front. But yeah, this is the other thing. So when I hear people say, I don't tolerate this, and this, I'm like, histamines. So some of our other common foods that we wouldn't think about, egg whites. So I've got a lot of my histamine folks eating scrambled egg yolks because those are not histamine producing, but the white is.
Oh, fascinating.
As you mentioned, a lot of the aged cheeses. So some of the more mild cheeses are okay if you tolerate dairy.
Yeah.
Any of the meats that are fresh and fish that is fresh, no shellfish, no citrus fruit, no tropical fruits, tomatoes and spinach are high. A lot of your nuts. So almonds and peanuts and walnuts are high. Any of your gluten-containing grains, avocado are high. Any of your beans or legumes, hot peppers. So that's another one that I'll have folks say they go out, and if there's any form of red pepper flakes, they immediately start coughing.
Interesting.
So
I think it's just a spice or something, and it's actually more. What about spices in general? Because a lot of them are sitting, they're dried and then they're sitting around. Does that tend to flare people, or is it only certain spices?
Yeah. So in regards to herbs and spices, I'm looking at my list here. Clover, fenugreek. Let me look at the spices. It's going to be more of the mushrooms are another really big
right. That makes total sense. The fungus among us, right?
Yes. Yes. Let's see. Cumin, curry. So a lot of those heat-based spices. Mustard, paprika, black pepper. Then your vinegars too. All vinegars.
They're aged.
Chilled because those are fermented. We've got soy sauce, again fermented. The vinegars, white vinegar. So yeah, those are going to be the most. But all of your alcohols.
So when you're doing an elimination diet, are you having people take all of those foods out, or is it typically only the ones that? Or do you do it in like chunks, or do you do? I mean, like, what's the process to getting to it?
So it depends on the severity of their symptoms. And kind of this laundry list of foods that they know they tend to react to. So we may go to anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. So it's not a long-term process, but if they're pretty symptomatic, we may go higher. And they're, with the histamine list, they do rank it. So it's like from 1 to 2 to 3. So we may remove the higherly. That's not what the higher rate.
I think we should find that one. It's now our word. Put it in the dictionary.
This is a vital health word just for you.
Oh, we spell vital wrong anyway, so.
There, we can make up our own word. Perfect.
We're co-opting it. Yeah, so the 3s would come out.
And the 2s,
typically. And they're paying attention, obviously, to their gut symptoms, their skin, their itching, maybe some of those nervous system symptoms, anxiety, insomnia, blood pressure fluctuations, heart rate fluctuations, those kind of things are impacted. Wow, that's really cool. And
I like to do like a formal symptom questionnaire before we embark on that. And then as we're working through the process, we're listening to the body and pivoting and adjusting as we need. And then at the end, before we start bringing things back in, because we'll reintroduce. Once we get the system calmed down, then we do another symptom questionnaire just to truly identify how much of an impact it
that makes sense. That makes total sense. People, in my experience, I'm sure you've seen this too, they tend to feel so much better. It when it's helpful, it's like the thing. And then it's not hard to maintain at all, because it just like you feel so much better that it's like, I don't miss my, tomato sauce because I feel so much better.
Exactly. And that's where too, any of these type of elimination diets, I hate the word because it sounds restrictive.
Yeah, it really does.
But what I work with people on all of the plans that I work on is like, look at all the things you can have. That's where we want to focus. That's where we want to hang your hat. It's like, and there's online, if you get online, you look up low histamine recipes for whatever you want to make. you're going to find something.
Yeah.
So whether you want to be a little bit more creative or you just want to be basic like me when I make my meals,
Keep it simple.
We'll swap, kale and romaine for spinach.
Yeah.
That's an easy swap.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes total sense. I almost want to say like the elimination should really be like elimination of symptoms, not elimination of food, because you're doing this to feel better, and it's not always intuitive because you think, oh, these are healthy things, these are, I should eat healthy things. And so, yeah, it's very nuanced and subtle, which is why I think working with a nutritionist, not only just kind of get it all straightened out, but like, you don't want to be on a food island. You don't want to feel like, oh my gosh, now I have to take all these foods out. What do I actually eat?
Exactly.
So that's so key to being able to make these massive transitions in one's life once you kind of either suspect or are confirmed with the diagnosis. To be able to make this transition, I think requires some support. I know I need it, so.
We all do.
Exactly. Exactly. So what are some of the supplements? I know I use some supplements in my practice to help, I guess I would say the word accelerate the process of healing. This is obviously about nutrition, number one. And then what are some of the supplements that we can talk about to help calm the histamine response even further?
Yeah. So the natural antihistamines like vitamin C and quercetin,
Mm-hmm.
those are probably the two top that I encourage people to use just to calm the system.
Mm-hmm.
And then even anything else that would, like an adaptogen for the nervous system, if they really are in the high stress mode.
Yep.
DAO is an enzyme that helps us clear histamine. So what I even talk with people about is, we're all creating histamines, but we're creating them at different levels due to different reasons.
Yes. A lot of it's genetic. A lot of genetics in that. Yes.
Yes. And if we're missing those enzymes that we would genetically make, those are helping us break it down so that it's not building up as much. And so if we keep building up and we don't have the enzymes to break it down, now that pot spills over and we get symptomatic.
Yes.
So DAO, you can replace that as an enzyme before eating.
Mm-hmm.
So it's ideal about 15 minutes before you eat. So that can be a little tricky, but I usually tell people just take it whenever you remember it. Ideally get it in your system so that your body is prepared for whatever food is coming in. And those are the main ones. And then there are digestive enzymes oftentimes are supportive outside of the DAO. And then even with probiotics, because a lot of, the gut dysfunctions like dysbiosis and SIBO can be some of those contributors to our histamine response. But we have to be careful because there are a few strains like Lactobacilli casei and Lactobacilli bulgaricus that can increase histamines.
Interesting.
So that the actual product is important to make sure that there's the strains that will help us calm down that response versus stimulate it.
Oh, that makes great sense. And actually, that's great to be able to personalize that sort of approach to your probiotic or your gut health to further support, the bacteria that are on your side versus the ones that are going to get in the way. Do you ever use bromelain, or is that something that would potentially not be good? Because I know bromelain is high in citrus, it's high in like pineapple and some of the tropical fruits, but is that, I use a lot of quercetin and bromelain when I'm working with like my asthmatic population or my people who have environmental or seasonal allergies. Would that be something that would be used here or no, potentially, because of the fact that it's high? I don't think they take it from those foods, but I don't know. Just
That's a good question. I haven't personally used it.
You like quercetin better?
I tend to use quercetin. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right, cool.
But that's a good, we could certainly try that too.
Yeah.
And see, because everybody is so different on how they do respond.
But I do think your point about, really creating good gut health. And this is one of those sort of classic functional medicine situations where, you're removing the offender, which in this case happens to be histamine driving things, whether it's histamine driving foods or histamine driving beverages or things like that. And then restoring the good bacteria and the healthy sort of anti-leaky gut protocols and things like that to really make the gut a solid place again so that the immune system isn't being triggered and stimulated the way it is with these type of histamine reactions.
Well, and stress, whether physical and psychological, as well as
Yes.
hormone imbalances also play a role. So, I mean,
Mhm.
as you know, we're
Oh
all
yeah.
dealing with those. So
Yes,
it's like,
not
how
just
do
with my
you,
patients, but with me.
yes, we all are dealing with that for
Right,
sure. And
exactly.
then have you ever heard like with the insomnia piece is like there's a histamine spike at around the 1 to 2 o'clock in the morning time?
Yeah, right before the cortisol spike, right?
Yes. So
Mhm.
I always like ask people, okay, you wake up and you have a hard time falling asleep. What time are you waking up?
Yes,
That
right.
might give us a little insight as to what we're dealing with.
Yes. And are you waking up anxious and itchy? I get some people who are like, all of a sudden I'm itchy in the middle of the night. And we're
Ah,
thinking like, oh, is it like your detergent that you're using for your sheets or, but yeah, it could just be that histamine increase that's happening in the middle of the night. Well, this has been so, I learned I learned a lot during this discussion. And here I thought I knew something about histamine, but thank you so much, Cindi. I really appreciate you sharing all this great information with our Vital Health members. And know that Cindi is available to see you if you feel like you need some help. Obviously, you work with your Vital Health clinician to see if this is a possibility. But yeah, I'm always so I don't like obviously making a diagnosis of histamine for patients or histamine problems because, they're like, oh gosh, this is gonna be hard. But it feels so
yeah.
much better that I can say like, and I have a nutritionist who's so good at this and she's gonna help. So it just, that support thing I think is so, so key. So thank you for spending time with me this morning and excited to have you as a part of Vital Health.
Thank you, Dr. Mullen.
Have a good one.
You too.